There it goes. It requires us to play with it every week. Okay, well, we're starting a little late today. For those of you who just watch online and don't know any better, there we go. The reason we started late is because we had our congregational meeting today, and so that took about our first half an hour. So I will try to move quickly today to get in our plans. We're talking about Job for the 5th time. This is our 5th week in the book of Job. I'll try to review super quick. In chapter 1, verses 6 through 8, we'll read those. There was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it." So one day, while there were many angels visiting the throne room of God, they were reporting their progress in whatever ministries he had assigned them to, an unexpected visitor showed up. The Satan, the enemy of all good. Now the Satan's real name is Lucifer, son of the morning. And in Ezekiel, he's called the covering cherub twice. But unlike the other cherubim, I think he looks like a giant dragon, because he's often described as a dragon. And he's called the covering cherub. But cherubs are not angels. They are angelic beings, but they're not angels. They're always talked of separately. They're always either called cherubim or living creatures, never angels. We're not sure how many angels there are. 2 verses in Scripture say this. There are 10,000 times 10,000 and thousands of thousands. Now, if you take that literally, that means there's millions of angels. But it might be just a way of the Bible saying they're innumerable. You couldn't count them. There might be billions or even trillions. If you think about it, it's not like God has to use up resources in order to create angels. He makes everything out of nothing. So there's no limit on resources to creating as many angels as he wants. So there could be trillions of angels. Now, one reason, though, for thinking that there are billions of angels is the idea that Jesus gives about guardian angels. Last week there was a question submitted online about giving more information on guardian angels. And we have a good reason for going deeper into that now. So let's review the verses we covered last week and talk about guardian angels. Verses 9 through 11 of Job 1. Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil?" Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the works of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." So I don't think that Satan comes to heaven very often. It seems to me that God summons the devil once in a while to come up to heaven just to tease the fiend. That's the way it looks to me, anyway. And God uses the Satan to bring more glory to himself. When God brings Satan to heaven, it is not to help Satan. It is to get more glory for himself. It is to prove that Satan is impotent and wrong. So this challenge, as many teachers tell you, they call it a poker game between God and the devil. That's wrong. Poker is a game of chance. Either person could win. But God doesn't play poker because nothing in the universe is up to chance. He already knows what's going to happen. He planned it. So God already knows that Job will survive these tests. But he also knows that the devil wants to harm Job, and God allows it to happen because Job will pull through, and a great book will be written about Satan's failure to corrupt him. So God brags about Job, knowing that Satan will demand a crack at the man to see if Job is a fraud. So when God brags about Job, the adversary gets angry. And he says, well, Job only loves you because you made him rich and you protect him. If you gave me and my demons a chance to hurt Job, you'll see what he's really like. You've made a hedge all around him, keeping me out. But if you drop your defenses and let me at the rich guy, I swear I will make him curse you like a sailor. So that's Satan's challenge to God. He says Job loves God only because God gives him cookies. Now the devil whines about this and he calls it a hedge that protects Job, his family and his possessions. This is obviously not a physical hedge, like made of ivy or some kind of a tree, because that wouldn't stop any demons. No, this is some sort of an angelic hedge of protection, and that's why we can talk about the guardian angel concept. So let's go through some Bible verses that may relate to guardian angels, or similar ideas. In Genesis chapter 18, God sends 2 angels into the wicked cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to investigate their wickedness and also to save Lot and his family from the coming firestorm. Apparently, these angels are not Lot's personal guardian angels because they weren't with him. They went from Abram to him, but they do successfully remove Lot from the city before the destruction. So this is one example of angels helping people. There's Psalm 34, verse 7. The angel of the Lord encamps all around those who fear him and deliver them. Now, the angel of the Lord is usually thought to be Jesus himself, but this does sound a lot like Satan's complaint that you've made a hedge all around Job and family. And if you also think about it, if Jesus has a physical form, which we know he does, and he's the angel of the Lord, he cannot camp all around a region. He can only be in one spot at the time. So I would say that he has other angels along with him. They're part of his support group, so to speak, protecting the godly. Now, Psalm 91, verses 9 through 13, they are very relevant, but I do want to point out they may be messianic. In fact, they're quoted often. They're quoted by Jesus in the temptation in Matthew. But here's Psalm 91, verses 9 through 13. Because you have made the Lord, who is my refuge, even the Most High, your dwelling place. No evil shall befall you, nor shall any plagues come near your dwelling. For he shall give his angels charge over you, to keep you in all your ways. In their hands they will bear you up, lest you dash your foot against a stone. You will tread upon lions and cobras, the young lions and serpents you shall trample underfoot. Now this is pretty obvious. The angels are around you, protecting you. Now it is clearly used of Jesus in Matthew and Luke perhaps, but it could also be related to us as well, and David, who probably wrote it. Now think about that though in Matthew 4:11. After Jesus was tempted for 40 days by the devil, angels came and ministered to him. And this is very similar to when Elijah got depressed and an angel came down and fed him and guarded him while he slept. So a couple more cases. But the most direct statement is from Jesus in Matthew 18:10. Take heed that you do not despise these little ones, for I say to you that in heaven their angels always see the face of their Father who is in heaven. Now Jesus does frequently mention children in Matthew 18, but he does also say earlier, quote, unless you are converted and become like little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. For this reason, I would say that guardian angels are not just for children. My guess is that they are for all Christians. That every Christian has at least one guardian angel, I think is fairly obvious. Perhaps more than one. Then there's the Garden of Gethsemane. When Jesus prayed, it says an angel comforted him in Luke. Matthew doesn't mention that, but Luke does. And finally, Hebrews 1:14 says that angels are ministering spirits sent forth to minister to those who inherit salvation. This implies, though, by the way, that angels do not really live in heaven all the time. At least most of the angels, they're designed to help people. So angels are here on earth, and they occasionally go up and report to God what's going on, and then they come back. So angels aren't in heaven all the time, praising God. We do see them in heaven at times, but most of them are down here helping us, is what appears to be their mission. So angels are mentioned hundreds of times in the Bible. I do believe that guardian angels is a correct doctrine, but I would say they're not just guardians, they're also helpers. They go to heaven and they report to God on their work and on our status. Remember that God sent angels to investigate Sodom, and that there are also angels in the book of Daniel called watchers, who observe nations and kings like Nebuchadnezzar. And when these kings get too far out of line, they demand justice from God. It's possible that these watchers are even demons because they're demanding justice, which isn't something that it seems the angels want to help us. Maybe the watchers don't. It's hard to say. But at any rate, that's the guardian angel explanation. But Satan is angry that he's been prevented from hurting Job. So look again at verses 9 and 10. Satan answered the Lord and said, does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him and around his household and around everything he has on every side? You've blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. I told you last week that the devil and demons have two main goals with humans on earth. His main goal is to kill you. The reason is that death, if you are an unbeliever, sends you immediately to hell, and you become his permanent slaves, and you can never be stolen back by Jesus. Once you're dead, it's too late for you. So that's his ultimate goal, is to kill us. But Satan is not always allowed by God to kill us. So he has to settle for less, which is corrupting us. If he can't kill us, he can ruin our witness and ruin our fellowship with God by getting us to sin and corruption. And it's interesting that the devil says, when God asks him where he's been, he says, wandering around the earth, to and fro. Well, that's interesting because it's also what 1 Peter 5:8 says, that the evil one is roaming around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Now, scientists, if you ever study lions, you'll learn that the roaring lion is actually the least dangerous in a pride of lions. If you've got one male and 5 lionesses and 10 babies, the one least dangerous is the roaring one. The reason is that the male with the big mane is also the laziest and the slowest of the lions. He can't run as fast, and he doesn't want to run as fast. So he makes the women do all the work. So what the roaring lion does is he gets on one side of a group of antelopes, and he roars as loud as he can, which is he's good at. And then that scares all the animals to run away from the roar, and his 5 lionesses are waiting in ambush. And when the antelope run that way, they jump up and grab them and eat them. And then the male comes over and eats first, and then the girls get to eat. Okay, so the roaring lion is the least dangerous of them. I can't be sure that that is true of the devil, but it is possible. Because I told you that as a dragon in the Garden of Eden, God took away his legs. And it would seem that when they were thrown out of heaven, their wings were clipped, so to speak. They're not supposedly able to fly around all the time anymore. So if this dragon no longer has good wings to fly up, and he no longer has legs, he's a big slug with sharp teeth. And he moves around real slow, but he's the boss. So all of his fast demons come around and get orders, and he sends them all out to do his dirty work. So he can't be everywhere at once. He's only in one place at one time, and I don't suspect he can move real fast. Anyway, he is like that. He is dangerous, but he's not the one who's probably going to get you. We're probably never going to meet the devil personally. We'll probably just get some low-level minions bothering us. Okay, well anyway, Satan hears about Job. He knows all about Job. He would love to get Job to curse God, because then Job's famous testimony in the Middle East would be wrecked. Everyone knows he's a godly man, and if he suddenly curses God, then the devil has taken back the Middle East. So he would love to show him as a fraud. So he complains to God that Job has a prosperity gospel. And in fact, he really does. But you know, today there's a lot of false prophets in many churches who teach that the purpose of Christianity is to make you rich. Name it and claim it. You tell God you want cars, he'll give you cars. If you have enough faith, is the caveat they always add. Well, that kind of thing was working for Job. Job was rich, and everything he did prospered. So Satan claimed publicly in front of all the angels and heavenly hosts that no human would love God just for being God. No, humans only pretend to love God because of all the rewards they get. And so he basically defrauds or claims evil of Job, and God says, okay, let's see if you're right. Let's see if Job is just a selfish hoarder and only likes me for the money I give him. So now let's go on to Job 1 verse 12. How does God respond to Satan's challenge? The Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your power. Only do not lay a hand on his person. Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Notice, first of all, that God puts limits on Satan's destruction. He does not allow Job to be touched physically. He says you can touch everything he has, everything he owns is yours, and he pulls back all of the angels that were protecting Job. The hedge collapses overnight, and now all the demons are allowed to do their work. Be clear on this, though. People who tell you that the devil brings all the disasters on earth are incorrect. God allows Satan to cause disasters, but sometimes God brings disasters himself. The devil was not responsible for the great flood. It had only been a few hundred years before Job when God killed almost everyone and every creature on earth. And that wasn't the devil, that was God. So sometimes God brings disasters. God brought the Babylonians to destroy Jerusalem in 586 BC. God brought the Romans to destroy Jerusalem in 70 AD. So the biggest disasters are usually caused by God himself. Little disasters, though, he often leaves to the devil. He sends the devil to bring disasters. Does that mean that God is not responsible since the devil did it? No. By responsible, though, I want you to know I do not mean that God is morally wrong or evil in bringing disasters. The fall brought entropy and chaos and pain and death. So these are normal things in the earth, and God is not responsible for them. Adam is responsible for them for the fall. So it is we who are responsible for these judgments, and our own current sins deserve judgment. So any disaster that befalls us is technically, at least generally, deserved. That's different, though, than saying that Job deserves these disasters, because the book shows he didn't. In fact, if anyone on earth didn't deserve disasters, Job's the guy, because he was a good and faithful and blameless man. However, these disasters come on him, and what that tells you is that whatever happened to him was not wrong for God to do. You see, God sends the most loathsome creature in the universe to destroy Job's life. And as the early church preacher Chrysostom wrote, God took away all of Job's stuff. Satan is only a second cause. And in more modern words, Lutzer says the same thing. Did Job's trial come from God or from the devil? The answer is obvious, that the immediate cause was the devil, but the ultimate cause was God. In other words, Satan is just doing what God wants him to do. Now, in other words, God is responsible for these things that happened to Job. Satan himself implies this in his challenge to God. After complaining about being blocked by God's hedge of protection, what did the devil say? Stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and Job will curse you to your face. Now that Hebrew phrase, stretch out your hand and touch, doesn't mean light touch, tickle touch. No, it means smack, punch, hurt. Slap is the very least it could mean. So Satan says, no, if you punch Job in the face, he will curse you. And so that's really what's happening here, is God is punching Job in the face to see if Job really loves him. God rules the world. God rules Satan. God removes his protection from Job, and God tells Satan, go ahead and destroy everything he owns. Now, to a lot of people, including a lot of Christians, they have a real problem with that. And the words they will use are this: that's not fair. Okay? That's not fair. Fair. Where in the Bible are we told that life is fair or that God is fair? You see, fairness is a human construct of what humans think seems right. In modern politics and television, people are demanding fairness. The whole idea of social justice is mostly about our feelings of equality. It's not fair that he has more money than me, so I'm going to vote for some candidate to steal it and give it to me. That's fairness. That is not justice. The difference, or one difference, between capitalism and socialism is that socialism pretends to promote fairness and equality, but requires you to destroy justice to do it. You see, God is just. God is not fair. God is righteous. He always does what is right. If you think that anything you see from God is wrong, guess who's wrong? You, not God. God is righteous. You're the one who doesn't understand. Abraham asked God about this when those angels were getting ready to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham asked God, will not the judge of the earth do right? Now that was a rhetorical question, I'm sure. Abraham knew that God wouldn't do wrong, and so if God destroys Sodom and Gomorrah, it's right. That's good that Abraham knew it, but do you know it? Or have you been fooled by the media to believe that God owes you fairness? This is one of the main points of the book of Job. It is not just Job's suffering. It is the idea that you may suffer too. And that is what makes this a scary book. Christopher Ash has a great book about Job, and here's what he says. The book of Job is scary because this terrible story may become your story too. In other words, it's easy to sit in the pew and say, oh wow, Job was really amazing how he handled that. That is not the point of the book. The point of the book is for you to say, wow, God could do that to me. What would I do? That's really the point. It's not to vicariously live through Job. You see, the Bible is a two-edged sword. It's meant to pierce your soul and teach you. And what we learn from the book of Job is that God might decide that he can be glorified by your downfall. That's a scary thought. And this is what the testing of God sometimes looks like. It is ugly and horrible and painful. So let's now look at what testing Job is put through by God. Let's read verses 13 through 17. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were feeding beside them, when the Sabaeans raided them and took them away. Indeed, they killed all the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another servant came and said, "The fire of God fell down from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you." And while he was still speaking, another came and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 bands, raided the camels, and took them away. Yes, they killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you." Okay, so everything that Job owned is gone in one day. The oxen and the donkeys are stolen by Arabian thieves who also killed all the servants, but one escaped. The Babylonians stole all the camels and killed everyone except one servant. Now, these are terrorist attacks, in a sense. They're unexpected thievery from wicked humans. But not just humans caused some of the destruction, because one servant said, "The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them." So this one's different. This is an act of God. Some commentators say it was lightning, but it's not like any lightning I've ever heard of, because he owned 7,000 sheep. So I did some research about sheep. Let me tell you about what I learned. Different sized groups of sheep are called different names. A flock or a fold of sheep is just a few, a dozen or 2 that you might have at home. A bigger group is called a herd or a drove. To survive, to make a living with sheep, you need about 500 sheep. You could live off the sales of the wool and the meat and etc. So Job had 7,000, so he had 14 times more than necessary to make a living at his sheep. He had lots of sheep. Now, as far as sheep herders go, they suggest that 100 sheep need 30 acres of land to pasture in. So 7,000 sheep would require 2,100 acres. 2,100 acres is about 3¼ square miles. So that's a huge territory. That would be about the size of Eureka. So all these sheep are living around town Eureka, you might say. Now, also, because sheep have sharp little feet and ruin the land they're in, if you leave them there too long, it gets muddy and they have nothing left to eat. So you spread them out. You don't keep them all in one spot. So it's very unlikely that all 7,000 sheep were in one big group and one bolt of lightning comes down and kills them all. In fact, it also says it consumed them. So lightning doesn't usually consume you, it just kills you, it stops your heart. So I believe it was actually fire from heaven, literally. There is fire from heaven several times in the Bible. One is when God sent fire down on one of David's sacrifices. Another is when Elijah called down fire from heaven on a sacrifice on Mount Carmel. Now Elisha, he called fire down out of heaven a few times to kill enemies who were coming to kill him. 50 guys come charging towards him with their swords out, and he called down a fire and they're burned up. Okay? So this did happen a lot. And in fact, James and John, the sons of thunder, they asked Jesus if they could call down fire from heaven to roast the Samaritans who were being mean. Jesus said no. So these are other cases of fire from heaven, but this one is probably the first one in the Bible, and it's possible that it is related to the fire that destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. We're told that sulfur came out of heaven and burned the cities. Now Job lived not far southeast of the Dead Sea, which is where Sodom and Gomorrah were. So if Job's sheep were kept between his place and Sodom and Gomorrah, somewhere in his north, it's possible that the fire rained down on them too and burned them up. It might have been in the blast radius of some kind of an eruption. Now, if Job wanted to rationalize in his mind that neighbors stole all of his goodies, that's not so bad. But when you have to say, okay, God was involved, because nobody calls down fire out of heaven except Elisha and Elijah, and so he has to know that God did this. But it's not over. Look at verses 18 and 19. One last servant struggles in. While he was still speaking, another came and said, "Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And suddenly a great wind came from across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house. And it collapsed on the young people, and they are all dead. And I alone have escaped to tell you." One thing that is not mentioned here, all it mentions is Job's children, 7 sons and 3 daughters. However, it is quite likely that they had children of their own. After all, after having that many kids, it's been at least 10 years to have 10 kids, but it says they were meeting at their oldest brother's house. Now, if the oldest brother has his own home, he probably has a family, a wife and children. And it's possible that some of his sisters have wife and kids. So we're talking about not just his children and their servants, but probably his grandchildren also. Lost them all. Now, some men are so wrapped up in their work, they live for their work, and work is more important than family. But that was not the case with Job. We saw earlier in the chapter how careful Job was to help his children and intercede for them all the time. And that's obviously why Satan saved the best for last. With 3 consecutive messengers, the devil takes away all of his retirement funds, his whole business, his animals were his wealth, and they're all gone. And then Lucifer drops the cherry on top and kills all of his children. And what's the worst thing about it? It was an act of God. It wasn't people. You know, if the Babylonians had come in stealing the camels and they killed all the kids, senseless murder, but still human. No, that's not what it was. Wind came from all 4 corners of the house and wrecked it, and it collapsed and crushed them all to death. That's an act of God, just like burning up the sheep. You see, God is being framed by Satan in a sense. Satan wants Job to know God hates you. God is destroying you. And this is his strategy to make Job curse God. Now, think about also, from a military point of view, the strategic and tactical brilliance of these attacks by Satan. I've written a couple books about military history. This is what the military would call a timing maneuver. Now, in a timing maneuver, you use multiple sources of attack to hit multiple targets. If you want it to be a surprise attack, you have to calculate the distance of each group who has to come in so that they all strike simultaneously. It's tricky because you've got distances to figure out. The reason you do that is so that if one enemy gets hit, they don't radio everybody else and say, look out, there's attack. You want to hit them all at once. Well, that's not what Satan's doing, though. Satan's doing something a little more complicated than that. He wants not surprise. That doesn't matter. What matters is when the news gets to Job, it has to all be together. So he's timing it backwards. When will the struggling, surviving servants get home? And the most important thing is that the kid servant dies last or arrives last. So my guess is that these servants were hindered by the devil to slow them down to make sure that the one with the kids' news gets there last, because that's the important thing. You see, if you see on TV when tornadoes strike and the news reporter sticks a mic in somebody's face and says, how do you feel about your home being destroyed? Almost always what they say is, well, it's horrible, but at least my family is safe. Most people care more about their family than they do about all their possessions. All that stuff can be replaced. So there's no use telling Job first that his kids are dead because he won't care about the other stuff. So no, basically in a boxing match, what you're seeing here is Satan jabs him in the face a few times in a row, makes him a little punchy, wow, what's going on? And then he hits him with the roundhouse to knock him down. You got to save the best one for last. So Satan's timing maneuver was brilliant. And none of this is fair. All of it theoretically and potentially could happen to me or to you. Job was a child of God just like we are. And yet God is wholly righteous. None of these disasters were morally wrong. God can apparently destroy my life or your life if he has a purpose in it. And by the way, its purpose is never to destroy you. It's to make you better. We're going to look in the future at why God did this. We won't have time for that today. But you know what? God will probably not explain it to you while you're on earth. Whatever bad thing happens to you, he's not going to tell you why he did it. He never told Job that. He talks for 4 chapters at the end of this book, never says a word about why he did anything to Job. We'll discuss that. But God doesn't owe us an explanation. God does everything for his own glory. Sometimes what he does is good. Sometimes what he does we think is bad. It's not bad. It's a test. It's to make us better people, more mature. So what Job has to face now is that God just destroyed his family and his business. And why? We have to come back to that in the future. But I want you to consider that the book of Job means a lot more than you thought before. It's one of the most important books of the Bible because it explains, I shouldn't say it explains, it describes the problem of pain and suffering. And that's one of the hardest things in life. And this is why we have the book of Job, to meditate on it and compare it to our own lives. All right, I finished on time. Mike, would you pray for us?
Sure. God, we're grateful for your word, Lord, for this time of study that we might come to worship you. Grateful for John and his research, Lord, the wisdom you've given to him. I pray, Lord, that we would take the time to meditate on the word, to search it, find what was taught today to be true, strengthen us in our walk with Christ. Use us to proclaim the gospel faithfully. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so there's a question for you. Make us think outside the box.
Can we turn this off here?
Sure.
I'm not sure how. How do you turn it off?
You go to this broadcast.